The ocean covers more than 70% of our planet's surface, yet we've explored less than 5% of its depths. Down there, in the crushing darkness where sunlight never reaches, explorers have uncovered discoveries so disturbing they've challenged everything we thought we knew about life, death, and the very limits of our world. The pressure down there would crush a human body in an instant. The temperature hovers just above freezing, and in that hostile, alien environment, we've found things that haunt the scientists who witnessed them. Things that changed our understanding of what's possible. Things that remind us how little we truly know about the planet we call home. On April 10, 1963, the most advanced nuclear submarine ever built by the United States Navy descended into the cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean, roughly 220 miles east of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. The USS Thresher, a sleek cigar-shaped vessel representing the cutting edge of Cold War technology, was conducting deep diving tests following an extensive overhaul at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. Aboard were 116 sailors and 13 civilian technicians, all confident in the capabilities of this revolutionary submarine. The Thresher was the first of her class, designed to hunt and destroy Soviet submarines in the depths of the ocean. She could dive deeper and move faster underwater than any submarine before her, reaching speeds of over 30 knots while submerged. Her hull was constructed from a new high-yield steel alloy called Y80, specifically engineered to withstand the crushing pressures of the deep sea. At 278 feet long and displacing over 4,000 tons when submerged, she was a marvel of naval engineering, equipped with the most sophisticated sonar system ever fitted to a submarine. That morning, the Thresher was accompanied by the USS Skylark, a submarine rescue ship that maintained communications with the vessel as it descended in a slow, careful pattern. The procedure was standard: dive to a certain depth, pause to check all systems, then continue deeper. Everything seemed normal as the submarine passed 1,000 feet, then 1,200 feet. The crew reported minor difficulties, but nothing that seemed cause for alarm. Then, at approximately 9:17 in the morning, while at a depth of 1,300 feet, the Thresher radioed a garbled message to the Skylark. The transmission was barely intelligible, but the words "test depth" could be made out. Then came another transmission, even more difficult to understand. The men aboard the Skylark strained to hear, their hearts beginning to race as they realized something had gone terribly wrong. What happened next would haunt everyone who heard it. Through the hydrophones, the crew of the Skylark listened to the sounds of a submarine breaking apart under immense pressure. It started as groaning metal, then a series of sharp cracks and pops, like a massive tin can being crushed by an invisible hand. The sounds grew louder, more violent, until finally there came a deep, rumbling implosion that echoed through the water. Then silence. Complete, absolute silence. The USS Thresher was gone, taking all 129 souls aboard to the bottom of the Atlantic. There would be no survivors, no last-minute rescue, no miraculous escape. The submarine had imploded at depth, torn apart by pressures exceeding 8,000 pounds per square inch, killing everyone aboard instantly. It remains to this day the deadliest submarine disaster in United States history. The Navy immediately launched the most extensive search operation in naval history. Ships converged on the area, deploying sonar and deep-towed camera systems to scour the ocean floor. But finding anything in water over 8,400 feet deep, where the Thresher had come to rest, proved extraordinarily difficult. The ocean bottom at that depth is a landscape of jagged rocks, deep crevices, and thick sediment that swallows evidence like quicksand. Finally, on June 27th, the bathyscaphe Trieste II located the main debris field. What the cameras revealed was deeply disturbing. The submarine hadn't simply sunk intact to the bottom. It had been shredded into thousands of pieces, scattered across the seafloor over a mile-wide area. The photographs showed twisted metal, crushed hull sections, and personal effects from the crew, all resting in the eternal darkness of the deep sea. One piece of pipe bore the markings 593 boat, confirming beyond doubt that this was the Thresher's final resting place. The Navy's investigation concluded that a piping system had failed, most likely a joint that had been silver brazed rather than welded. When the pipe ruptured, seawater flooded into spaces containing electrical equipment, causing a catastrophic short circuit that shut down the nuclear reactor. Without power, the submarine couldn't blow its ballast tanks quickly enough to surface, and it began sinking deeper and deeper until the pressure exceeded what the hull could withstand. But what made this discovery truly disturbing wasn't just the loss of life, or even the violence of the submarine's destruction. It was what the investigation revealed about the state of naval engineering at the time. Tests had shown that approximately 14% of the Thresher's silver brazed joints were potentially defective, yet most were deemed acceptable risks. The submarine had been rushed into service to counter a new class of Soviet nuclear submarines, and in that rush, critical safety concerns had been overlooked or minimized. Even more unsettling were the reports from other submarines. Nearly 3 years before the Thresher's loss, the USS Barbel had suffered a silver brazed joint failure near test depth, flooding the engine room with 18 tons of water. Months later, the USS Abraham Lincoln experienced similar failures during trials. The warning signs were there, but they were ignored in the race to deploy more submarines. When deep-sea explorers returned to the Thresher's wreck site in later years, they found something that continues to disturb those who've seen the footage. The debris field isn't just scattered metal and machinery. There are personal items, everyday objects that remind you that 129 people died here. Coffee cups, tools, pieces of clothing, all resting in the sediment, untouched for decades, a permanent memorial to those who perished in the crushing depths. The wreck sits in complete darkness, perpetually cold, slowly being consumed by rust and marine growth. No light has reached it naturally in over 60 years. The pressure at that depth would kill a human instantly, collapsing lungs and rupturing organs before consciousness could even register what was happening. And yet, despite the hostile environment, life has found the wreck. Deep-sea creatures now inhabit the debris field, treating the submarine's remains as just another part of the seafloor landscape. The Navy has monitored the site periodically over the decades, checking for radiation leaks from the submarine's nuclear reactor. The good news is that the reactor remains intact, sealed within its compartment, posing no environmental threat. But the psychological impact of the disaster has never faded. For the families of those lost, the Thresher is more than just a wreck on the ocean floor. It's a grave site, a place where their loved ones remain entombed in the darkness, beyond reach, beyond recovery. The loss of the USS Thresher led to sweeping changes in submarine design and construction. The Navy instituted the SubSafe program, a rigorous series of safety protocols and design modifications intended to prevent another such disaster. Since SubSafe's implementation, only one Navy submarine has been lost, the USS Scorpion in 1968, and it was not SubSafe certified. The program has been credited with saving countless lives over the decades. Yet the Thresher remains down there, a disturbing reminder of what can go wrong when human technology ventures into environments we barely understand. The deep ocean showed no mercy that April day in 1963. It crushed the submarine like a toy, snuffed out 129 lives in an instant, and kept the wreckage as a permanent testament to the ocean's power. In the summer of 1997, scientists with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration were monitoring underwater volcanic activity in the southern Pacific Ocean using an array of hydrophones, underwater microphones deployed across thousands of miles of ocean. These sensitive instruments, originally designed to detect Soviet submarines during the Cold War, had been repurposed for scientific research. They could pick up sounds from incredible distances, listening to the symphony of noises that fills the ocean: whale songs, undersea earthquakes, the grinding of tectonic plates. But on one particular day, the hydrophones captured something that didn't fit any known category. It was a sound unlike anything the researchers had heard before. When played back at normal speed, it had a deep, rumbling quality, like distant thunder rolling across water. But when sped up 16 times to make it audible to human ears, it became something else entirely. It blooped. A rising, undulating tone that seemed organic, almost alive. The scientists named it the bloop. What made the bloop so disturbing wasn't just its strangeness. It was the sheer volume of the sound. The hydrophones that picked it up were positioned more than 3,000 miles apart, yet they all detected it clearly. To travel that far through water, the sound would have to be extraordinarily powerful, far louder than any known animal vocalization, louder than a blue whale, the largest creature ever to exist on Earth, louder than any submarine or ship, louder than anything humanity had ever recorded coming from the ocean. The source of the sound was triangulated to a remote point in the South Pacific, west of the southern tip of South America, in some of the deepest, most unexplored waters on the planet. The location itself was unsettling, thousands of miles from any significant landmass, in a region where the ocean floor plunges to depths exceeding 3 miles. Speculation ran wild. Some scientists suggested it could be a previously unknown species of marine animal, something massive lurking in the abyss that humanity had never encountered. The frequency pattern of the bloop did bear some resemblance to biological sounds, to the variations you'd expect from a living creature. But if it was an animal, it would have to be far larger than a blue whale to produce such volume. We're talking about a creature, potentially hundreds of feet long, dwelling in the deepest, darkest parts of the ocean. The idea wasn't as far-fetched as it might sound. The ocean is vast and largely unexplored. We know remarkably little about what lives in its deepest reaches. New species are discovered regularly, and some of them are enormous. The colossal squid, for instance, wasn't scientifically documented until relatively recently, and it can grow to over 40 feet long and weigh over a ton. If something that large can remain hidden, what else might be down there? Others proposed more exotic explanations. Could it be geological in origin? Perhaps an underwater volcanic eruption or a massive underwater landslide? The problem with these theories was that the bloop's acoustic signature didn't match known geological events. It had that organic quality, that rising and falling frequency that suggested something living, something breathing, something enormous moving through the water. Some pointed to industrial sources, sunken ships, underwater military installations, decaying machinery on the seafloor, all slowly groaning and shifting under the pressure and currents. There were even theories about lost Cold War submarines, nuclear vessels that had gone missing decades earlier, their hulls finally giving way after years of deterioration. The idea of a submarine's metal hull slowly buckling and creating these sounds was both plausible and deeply unsettling. For years, the bloop remained one of the ocean's most tantalizing mysteries. Scientists couldn't explain it. The public was fascinated by it. It entered popular culture, spawning theories about sea monsters and undiscovered species. Some connected it to legends of the Kraken, the mythical giant squid said to drag ships to their doom. Others went further, suggesting it might be evidence of something truly unknown, perhaps even extraterrestrial. The NOAA scientists were cautious in their statements. They acknowledged that the sound was unusual, that it didn't fit neatly into any category. Christopher Fox, one of the researchers who first analyzed the bloop, stated in interviews that if it was biological in origin, it would have to come from something much larger than a blue whale. He was careful to note that they simply didn't know what had caused it. Then slowly, additional evidence began to emerge. Between 2005 and 2010, NOAA deployed more hydrophones in the Southern Ocean, particularly in the waters around Antarctica. These instruments began detecting similar sounds, dozens of them, all with acoustic signatures remarkably similar to the original bloop. The pattern became clear. These sounds were coming from the Antarctic ice shelves. The explanation, when it finally came, was both mundane and awe-inspiring. The bloop was an icequake. It was the sound of a massive iceberg calving, breaking away from the Antarctic ice shelf and crashing into the sea. The noise was created by the violent fracturing of ice hundreds of feet thick. The crack propagating through the ice faster than sound travels through air, creating enormous acoustic energy that radiated through the water. When ice that size breaks, it doesn't just snap. It shatters with tremendous force, sending shock waves through the surrounding ice and water. The sound travels through water far more efficiently than through air, which is why the hydrophones could detect it from thousands of miles away. And when you speed up the recording, the crack and rumble of breaking ice does sound eerily organic, like some massive creature calling out in the darkness. The revelation explained other mysterious sounds that had been recorded over the years, sounds that scientists had struggled to categorize. Many of them, it turned out, were also icequakes. The Antarctic ice shelves are constantly shifting, cracking, and calving, especially as global temperatures rise and the ice becomes less stable. Every year, there are tens of thousands of these icequakes, each one sending powerful acoustic signals through the ocean. But while the mystery was solved, the bloop remains disturbing for different reasons. First, it serves as a stark reminder of how much we don't understand about our own planet. For years, scientists couldn't explain a sound coming from Earth. They had to deploy additional monitoring equipment and spend over a decade analyzing data before they could determine that it was just breaking ice. Second, and perhaps more unsettling, the bloop is evidence of the accelerating changes happening to our climate. The Antarctic ice shelves are breaking apart more frequently now, producing more of these massive icequakes. Each bloop-like sound isn't just an acoustic curiosity. It's a piece of the ice shelf falling into the ocean, contributing to rising sea levels, altering ocean currents, and fundamentally changing the planet's climate system. The location where the bloop originated is now a hotspot for these events. Scientists monitoring the area have detected hundreds of similar sounds in recent years, each one marking another chunk of Antarctic ice lost to the warming ocean. What once seemed like evidence of a mysterious deep-sea creature has become evidence of something potentially more frightening: the the rapid destabilization of the polar ice caps. And finally, there's the sobering realization that if something the size of breaking ice can remain unexplained for so long, what else might be down there that we haven't detected yet? The ocean is enormous, deeper than Mount Everest is tall, filled with pressure and darkness that make exploration nearly impossible. We've mapped more of Mars than we have of our own ocean floor. If we couldn't immediately explain the bloop, how many other sounds, how many other phenomena are occurring in the deep that we're completely unaware of? On February 17, 1977, the deep-sea submersible Alvin descended to the floor of the Galapagos Rift, a tectonically active region of the Pacific Ocean floor, roughly 8,000 feet below the surface. The three-person crew, pilot Jack Donnelly and scientific observers Jack Corliss and Geert Van Andel, expected to find a barren, lifeless landscape. Everything scientists understood about life on Earth suggested that the deep ocean should be virtually devoid of living things. No sunlight penetrated to those depths, meaning no photosynthesis could occur, which meant no plants could grow, which meant nothing could live there in any significant numbers. They were about to discover that everything they thought they knew was wrong. As Alvin's lights swept across the sea floor, something strange came into view. The water shimmering, actually shimmering, like heat waves rising from hot pavement on a summer day. Temperature sensors on the submersible spiked, showing water temperatures of 8 degrees Celsius, remarkably warm compared to the near-freezing temperatures typical of the deep ocean. The shimmering water was pouring out of cracks in the seafloor, carrying with it dissolved minerals that precipitated out as the hot water mixed with cold seawater, creating clouds of particles that gave the water its hazy appearance. The crew had found what they were looking for, a hydrothermal vent, the first one ever witnessed by human eyes. But what they found next was far more shocking than the vent itself. The seafloor around the vent was alive, not just alive, but teeming with life in quantities and varieties that shouldn't exist. There were white clams, enormous specimens nearly a foot long, clustered around the vent opening. When the crew retrieved some of these clams for study, they discovered something deeply unsettling. The flesh inside was blood red, saturated with hemoglobin like human tissue. But clams were just the beginning. As Alvin explored the area over subsequent dives, the crew encountered an entire ecosystem that defied explanation. There were tube worms, some over 8 feet tall, swaying in the current like ghostly trees. Their bodies were white and featureless, but their tops bloomed with brilliant red plumes that looked almost like flowers. There were crabs scuttling across the rocks, their shells bleached white, their eyes absent or reduced to useless stubs because there was no light to see by. There were shrimp by the thousands, swarming around the hottest parts of the vents where the water reached temperatures high enough to sterilize surgical equipment. There were mussels forming thick beds, anemones waving their tentacles, and strange creatures that didn't fit into any known category. Scientists would later describe one organism as looking like a dandelion, delicate and orange, drifting in the current. It turned out to be a siphonophore, related to the Portuguese man-of-war, but unlike any species ever seen before. What made this discovery truly disturbing was the implication: life didn't need the sun. For billions of years, scientists had believed that all life on Earth ultimately depended on photosynthesis, on plants converting sunlight into energy that could then be consumed by animals. The entire food chain, from plankton to whales, was supposedly built on that foundation. But here, in the complete darkness of the deep sea, an entire ecosystem was thriving without any connection to the sun whatsoever. The explanation, when researchers figured it out, rewrote biology textbooks. The organisms around the hydrothermal vents were using chemosynthesis instead of photosynthesis. Bacteria in the vent water were consuming hydrogen sulfide, a chemical that would be toxic to most life, and using its chemical energy to build organic molecules. These bacteria formed the base of the food chain, just as plants do on the surface. But instead of sun-powered plants, the system ran on earth-powered chemistry. Many of the larger animals had evolved symbiotic relationships with these bacteria. The giant tube worms, for instance, had no mouths and no digestive systems. Instead, they had a specialized organ called a trophosome, packed full of chemosynthetic bacteria. The worms would absorb hydrogen sulfide and oxygen from the water using specialized hemoglobin in their blood, transport it to the trophosome, and the bacteria would use those chemicals to produce food. The worms lived off the bacteria's waste products. The giant clams had similar arrangements, hosting bacteria in their gills. The shrimp that swarmed the hottest parts of the vents didn't have eyes, but they had developed organs that could detect the infrared radiation emitted by the superheated water, essentially seeing heat instead of light. They would position themselves at the edge of the scalding discharge, farming bacteria off the rocks and consuming them in massive quantities. The discovery had profound implications. If life could exist in the complete darkness of the deep sea, independent of the sun, then life might exist in places previously thought impossible. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn, like Europa and Enceladus, have subsurface oceans covered by miles of ice. No sunlight reaches those waters, yet if Earth's hydrothermal vent communities could thrive without sun, perhaps similar communities existed on those distant moons. It also raised disturbing questions about the origins of life itself. For decades, scientists had theorized that life began in shallow, sunlit pools where lightning and UV radiation provided the energy needed to spark the first organic molecules. But the hydrothermal vents offered an alternative. Deep sea vents providing heat, minerals, and chemical energy in abundance. Maybe life didn't begin in the sun-drenched shallows. Maybe it began in the crushing darkness of the deep ocean, in conditions that would kill most organisms we know today. When biologists returned to study the vent communities in more detail in 1979, they found even more disturbing details. The vents weren't permanent. They would go extinct after a few decades as the volcanic activity that powered them shifted location. When a vent died, its entire ecosystem died with it. The giant tube worms, the clams, the shrimp, everything dependent on that vent's chemistry would perish. Their larvae would have to find other active vents, sometimes miles away across barren seafloor, or face extinction. This created a strange dynamic where the animals were locked in a constant race against time. They had to grow quickly, reproduce quickly, and spread their offspring far and wide before their home vent went cold. The result was a kind of boom and bust existence, completely unlike anything seen in other ecosystems. You'd have these explosions of life around active vents, then ghost towns of dead shells around extinct ones. Perhaps most disturbing was what researchers found when they analyzed the bacteria more closely. These organisms were living at the absolute edge of what chemistry allows. Some species were thriving in water hot enough to boil, at temperatures that would denature proteins and break down DNA in almost any other organism. They had evolved exotic biochemistry, proteins that remained stable at extreme temperatures, mechanisms for repairing constant thermal damage to their cells. In essence, the bacteria were living in conditions similar to those found on the early Earth, when the planet was much hotter and more volcanically active. Studying these organisms provided a window into what life might have looked like billions of years ago, and what it might look like on other planets where conditions are more extreme than anything found on Earth's surface today. The discovery of hydrothermal vents and their associated ecosystems remains one of the most significant scientific findings of the 20th century. It fundamentally changed how we think about life, about where it can exist, about how it can exist. And it reminded us in the most visceral way possible that the deep ocean is not a dead zone. It's a strange, alien world, full of life forms so bizarre they seem like they belong on another planet entirely. On September 1st, 1985, at approximately 1 o'clock in the morning, a group of scientists aboard the research vessel Nor crowded around a video monitor, watching grainy black and white footage transmitted from an unmanned submersible crawling along the ocean floor more than 12,000 feet below. They had been searching for days, methodically covering square mile after square mile of barren sea floor, and the strain was beginning to show. They had only a few days left before the expedition would have to end. Then someone shouted. On the screen, emerging from the darkness, was an unmistakable object. A massive boiler, its rivets still visible despite decades underwater. Within moments, more debris came into view, and the realization hit everyone simultaneously. They had found it. They had found the RMS Titanic. But what almost no one aboard the Nor knew, what remained classified for decades afterward, was that finding the Titanic hadn't been the expedition's primary mission. It had been a cover story. The real reason Robert Ballard and his team were searching the North Atlantic with cutting-edge underwater technology wasn't to locate a famous shipwreck. It was to find two missing United States Navy nuclear submarines, the USS Thresher and the USS Scorpion. The Navy wanted to know what had happened to their submarines, whether their nuclear reactors posed any environmental threat, and whether any sensitive equipment had been compromised. But they couldn't launch a high-profile search for lost nuclear submarines without alerting the Soviet Union, which would surely send its own vessels to investigate. So they needed a cover story, something that would explain the presence of advanced deep-sea exploration equipment in the North Atlantic without raising suspicions. Enter the Titanic. The most famous shipwreck in history had remained undiscovered for over 70 years, despite numerous attempts to locate it. Ballard had been obsessed with finding the ship for years, and the Navy saw an opportunity. They would fund Ballard's search, but only after he completed his secret mission to survey the submarine wrecks. If he had any time left afterward, he could look for the Titanic. Ballard found the Thresher first, then the Scorpion. What he saw in the video footage from both sites was deeply disturbing. The submarines hadn't simply sunk to the bottom intact. They had imploded catastrophically, shredding into thousands of pieces scattered across huge debris fields. The Scorpion's wreckage was spread over an area nearly a mile wide, twisted metal and mangled equipment lying in the sediment. But studying the debris patterns taught Ballard something crucial about how to find the Titanic. When a large vessel sinks and breaks apart, it doesn't leave just one target on the seafloor. It leaves a trail of debris, objects that fell out of the ship as it sank or broke off during the impact with the ocean floor. This debris trail is much larger and easier to find than the wreck itself. Instead of looking for one specific target, you look for any sign of debris, then follow the trail to the main wreck site. With less than 2 weeks remaining on the expedition, Ballard turned his attention to the Titanic's last known position. Using this new debris field strategy, he programmed his underwater vehicle, nicknamed Argo, to make broad, sweeping passes across the search area, looking for any anomalies on the seafloor. For days, they found nothing but sediment and rock. Then, in the early morning hours of September 1st, debris started appearing on the monitors. First, small objects, unidentifiable at first. Then larger pieces, a section of hull plating, more debris. The trail was unmistakable. They followed it, barely breathing, until suddenly the Titanic's bow loomed out of the darkness, upright and remarkably intact, its railings still visible, its anchor chains draped across the deck. The moment should have been one of pure celebration. They had achieved what many thought impossible. But as Ballard and his crew stared at the image on the monitor, someone noted the time. It was approximately 2:20 in the morning. The exact time, 73 years earlier, that the Titanic had slipped beneath the surface of the North Atlantic, taking over 1,500 people with it. The realization hit them all at once. They weren't just looking at a famous shipwreck. They were looking at a mass grave. The men and women who had died when the Titanic sank were still down there, somewhere in the debris field, or absorbed into the sediment. This wasn't a treasure to be celebrated. It was a cemetery, a monument to a terrible tragedy. What made the discovery even more disturbing was what they found as they explored the wreck site over subsequent expeditions. The Titanic had broken in two as it sank, the stern section separating from the bow and plunging to the ocean floor separately. The stern section was utterly destroyed, crumpled and torn apart by the violence of its final descent. The bow, by contrast, was hauntingly intact, its windows still in place, its decks still recognizable. Personal belongings littered the debris field, shoes arranged in pairs as if someone had just stepped out of them, the leather preserved by the cold, oxygen-poor water, while the bodies themselves had long since decomposed. Dishes still stacked in what had been the kitchen. Luggage, its contents scattered. A porcelain doll lying face up in the sediment, its painted eyes staring into darkness that would last forever. The Titanic's grand staircase, once the crown jewel of the ship's first-class accommodations, was gone, collapsed into the ship's interior. The dome that had covered it, made of wrought iron and glass, had imploded and fallen through the decks. But you could still see where it had been, the empty space a haunting reminder of the elegance that once filled this vessel. One of the most disturbing images from the wreck site shows a section of deck with benches still in place, positioned where first-class passengers would have sat to enjoy the ocean view. It's not hard to imagine those benches occupied, people sitting there enjoying their evening, completely unaware that in a few hours they would be fighting for their lives in freezing water or going down with the ship. The Titanic is slowly disintegrating. Each time explorers visit, they document more collapse, more deterioration. Rusticles, formations created by bacteria, consuming the ship's iron, hang from every surface like orange icicles. Eventually, the bacteria will consume the entire vessel, reducing it to rust and sediment. In another 100 years, the Titanic may be unrecognizable, just another lump on the ocean floor. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the discovery is how it illustrates the ocean's indifference to human tragedy. The Titanic sank during what was supposedly the ship's finest hour, a marvel of engineering on its maiden voyage. More than 1,500 people died, many of them freezing to death in the water while lifeboats floated half-empty nearby. It was a catastrophe that shocked the world, that changed maritime safety regulations forever. And yet, the ocean didn't care. The ship sank, the debris settled, and life went on. Deep-sea organisms colonized the wreck, treating it as just another habitat. Bacteria began the slow process of consuming the metal. The ocean absorbed this human tragedy without so much as a ripple, the same way it's absorbed countless ships over the millennia. The Titanic serves as a reminder that the ocean isn't malevolent, but it isn't benevolent either. It simply is, vast and indifferent, ready to swallow anything that ventures onto its surface. On March 26, 2012, filmmaker and explorer James Cameron squeezed himself into the cramped pilot sphere of a unique submersible called Deep Sea Challenger. The vehicle looked like a vertical torpedo, painted lime green, standing 24 feet tall, but only 43 inches wide. Its design was radical, unlike any submersible built before. Cameron had spent 7 years developing this craft with a team of engineers and deep-sea experts, all with one goal: to reach the deepest point on Earth. The Challenger Deep, located in the Mariana Trench southwest of Guam, plunges to a depth of nearly 36,000 feet, over 6.5 miles below the surface. The pressure at that depth exceeds 15,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a car like a beer can. Only 2 people had ever been there before: Navy Lieutenant Don Walsh and oceanographer Jacques Piccard, who made the descent in 1960 in the bathyscaphe Trieste. They spent 20 minutes on the bottom before ascending, having seen little beyond sediment and a few small creatures. Cameron's dive would be different. His submersible was equipped with multiple high-definition cameras, powerful LED lights, and a mechanical sampling arm to collect specimens. He would spend hours on the seafloor, documenting everything he could find, looking for life, looking for geological features, looking for answers to questions scientists had been asking for decades. The descent took 2 hours and 36 minutes, Cameron falling through the water column in darkness that became absolute. Through the submersible's viewport, a thick disc of acrylic nearly 10 inches across, he watched bioluminescent creatures drift past like stars. Tiny jellyfish, transparent shrimp, creatures without names, all glowing with cold light in the eternal night of the deep ocean. Then, gradually, even the bioluminescence faded. The last 1,000 feet of descent occurred in complete blackness. No light but what the submersible carried, nothing visible but sediment particles caught in the lights. When the submersible touched down, Cameron's first impression was of an alien world more foreign than Mars. The seafloor was flat, covered in fine sediment that puffed up in clouds when disturbed. The pressure gauge showed 36,000 feet of water overhead. The viewport was the only thing between Cameron and instant death, a piece of acrylic material engineered to withstand forces that would kill him before his nervous system could register pain. What Cameron found, or rather, what he didn't find, was disturbing in its implications. The Challenger Deep was not lifeless, but it was shockingly barren compared to other deep-sea environments. There were small amphipods, shrimp-like creatures scuttling across the sediment. There were microbial mats, bacterial communities covering the rocks. But there were no fish, no larger organisms, nothing that suggested a complex ecosystem. The sediment itself told a story. Analysis of samples Cameron brought back revealed organic material, the remains of life from the surface world that had drifted down over thousands of years. Marine snow, they call it, a constant gentle rain of death that feeds the deep. But at the Challenger Deep, even this food source is scarce. The sediment there is ancient, some of it millions of years old, compressed and undisturbed for longer than human civilization has existed. Cameron described the experience as profoundly isolating. The submersible's communication system allowed him to stay in touch with the support ship on the surface, but the signal had to travel over 6 miles through water, creating a significant delay. If something went wrong, if the submersible became trapped or damaged, rescue would be impossible. He was farther from help than astronauts on the International Space Station, with no way to escape except up, through 36,000 feet of water that wanted to crush him. The geology of the Challenger Deep is equally disturbing. The trench was formed by the collision of tectonic plates, the Pacific Plate diving beneath the Mariana Plate in a process called subduction. The seafloor there is actively being consumed, dragged down into the Earth's mantle where it will be melted and recycled over millions of years. Cameron was sitting at the entrance to Earth's interior, in a place where the planet's crust quite literally disappears. But perhaps the most disturbing finding from Cameron's expedition came from the sediment samples. Chemical analysis revealed not just organic material, but traces of human-made pollutants. PCB's industrial chemicals banned decades ago, but still persistent in the environment. Microplastics, tiny fragments of plastic waste that have spread throughout the ocean. Even at the deepest point on Earth, in a place that should be pristine and untouched, humanity's impact was evident. The implications are sobering. If pollutants can reach the Challenger Deep, they can reach anywhere in the ocean. There is no place remote enough, no depth great enough to escape the consequences of human activity. The chemicals and plastics we released decades ago are still circulating through the ocean, accumulating in places we've barely explored, potentially affecting organisms we haven't even discovered yet. Cameron's dive also revealed something unsettling about the pace of deep-sea exploration. Despite sending probes to Mars and rovers across its surface, despite landing astronauts on the moon and maintaining a permanent presence in space, we've sent fewer people to the deepest parts of our own ocean than we've sent to space. The Challenger Deep had only been visited by 3 people in over 50 years when Cameron made his descent. We know more about the surface of Mars than we know about most of the ocean floor. The reasons are practical. The deep ocean is harder to reach than space in many ways. The pressure increases 1 atmosphere for every 33 feet of depth, creating crushing forces that require enormous engineering efforts to overcome. Salt water is corrosive, electrical systems must be completely sealed, and any failure at depth means certain death. Space is dangerous, but at least it doesn't try to crush and corrode everything it touches. When Cameron surfaced after nearly 8 hours underwater, the first words he spoke were about the isolation. He compared the experience to being on another planet, one that was inhospitable and alien in every way. And he noted that what disturbed him most wasn't what he found, but what he didn't find. The Challenger Deep should have been teeming with strange life, with bizarre organisms adapted to extreme pressure and total darkness. Instead, it was a desert, a vast plain of sediment with only scattered evidence of life. Scientists who analyzed the data from Cameron's dive have since theorized that the Challenger Deep might actually be too deep, too isolated to support much life. The pressure there may be beyond what even extremophile organisms can adapt to. The food supply is so limited that only the most efficient organisms can survive. It may be that life has found its absolute limit there, the very edge of what Earth's conditions allow. In the cold, dark waters of the Southern Ocean surrounding Antarctica, beneath hundreds of feet of water, dwells something that seems like it shouldn't exist. The colossal squid, Mesonychoteuthis hamiltoni, is the largest invertebrate on Earth, reaching lengths of over 40 feet and weighing more than 1,000 pounds. Its eyes are the largest in the animal kingdom, measuring 11 inches across, larger even than those of the great whales. And despite its enormous size, it remains one of the most mysterious creatures on the planet. Only a handful of complete colossal squid specimens have ever been recovered, most of them found in the stomachs of sperm whales or caught accidentally by deep-sea fishing operations. Living specimens have never been studied. Everything we know about these animals comes from dead individuals and the scars they leave on whales. The colossal squid exhibits something called deep-sea gigantism, a phenomenon where organisms living in the deep ocean grow to enormous sizes compared to their shallow water relatives. It's not just the colossal squid. The giant squid, a different species, can reach lengths of over 40 feet. Giant isopods, related to pill bugs but the size of cats, scuttle across the deep sea floor. Japanese spider crabs have leg spans exceeding 12 feet. The giant oarfish, longest bony fish in the world, can reach lengths of over 50 feet. All of these creatures live in the deep ocean. All are vastly larger than their shallow water cousins, and scientists are still debating exactly why. The leading theory is that the deep ocean's unique conditions favor large body size. The water is cold, which slows metabolism and allows organisms to live longer, giving them more time to grow. Food is scarce, and larger animals are more efficient at using energy, better able to survive long periods between meals. Predation pressure is lower in the deep sea, removing one of the main factors that limit size in shallow water. And the high oxygen content of cold water may make it easier for large organisms to breathe. But there's something deeply unsettling about these giants. The colossal squid's arms are lined with hooks, sharp chitinous structures that rotate on swiveling clubs designed to pierce and grip prey. Its beak, located at the center of its arms, is powerful enough to slice through steel cable. The squid's feeding technique is brutal. It uses its two feeding tentacles to snatch prey from a distance, dragging the victim toward its waiting arms, which then tear the prey apart, while the beak cuts it into pieces small enough to swallow. Sperm whales, the only regular predators of adult colossal squid, bear the scars of battles with these creatures. Many sperm whales have circular scars on their heads and bodies, marks left by the squid's hooks as the whale tried to consume it. Some scars are enormous, suggesting squid even larger than the specimens scientists have recovered. Beaks found in whale stomachs have come from squid estimated to weigh over 1,500 pounds, far larger than any specimen ever examined intact. The battles between sperm whales and colossal squid occur in complete darkness, thousands of feet below the surface, and no human has ever witnessed one. We can only imagine what these encounters are like, the whale diving deep, using echolocation to track the squid's movements, the squid detecting the whale's approach with its enormous eyes and trying to escape or fight back. The whale closing in, its massive jaws opening, the squid lashing out with its arms, hooks tearing into blubber. Sometimes the whale wins, sometimes perhaps the squid escapes, and sometimes both are injured, the whale surfacing with fresh scars, the squid damaged but alive. What makes the colossal squid particularly disturbing is how little we know about its life cycle. How do they reproduce? Where do they lay their eggs? How long do they live? What exactly do they eat, and how much? We have no answers to these questions. The squid spend their entire lives in the deep ocean, never coming to the surface, living in an environment humans can barely access. Every colossal squid that's been studied has been either dead or dying, providing only snapshots of information about creatures that may live for decades. The giant squid, Architeuthis dux, is slightly better known, but no less disturbing. These animals have appeared in maritime legends for centuries, possibly inspiring tales of the Kraken, a monster said to be large enough to drag ships to their doom. While giant squid aren't quite that large, they're still enormous, with bodies up to 16 feet long and feeding tentacles that can extend another 30 feet beyond that. Giant squid have the second largest eyes in the animal kingdom, after the colossal squid, measuring about 10 inches across. These massive eyes are thought to help the squid detect sperm whales, their primary predator, from a distance in the dim light of the deep ocean. The squid can see the whale's silhouette from far enough away to have time to escape. But what's truly disturbing about giant squid is their intelligence. Cephalopods, the group that includes squid and octopuses, have complex nervous systems and sophisticated brains. The giant squid's brain is particularly large, and genetic analysis has revealed that they have genes associated with brain development similar to those found in vertebrates. They may be capable of problem solving, of learning, of behaviors we typically associate with much more advanced animals. The thought of intelligent creatures the size of school buses lurking in the deep ocean, fighting battles with whales in the darkness, breeding and dying without human knowledge, is profoundly unsettling. These aren't simple organisms. They're sophisticated predators with complex behavior and, potentially, consciousness of a sort we can barely imagine. Deep-sea gigantism isn't limited to invertebrates. The Greenland shark, which lives in the Arctic and North Atlantic, can grow to over 20 feet long and may live for over 400 years, making it the longest-lived vertebrate known to science. These sharks move slowly through the icy water, hunting fish and seals, growing so gradually that they don't reach sexual maturity until they're over 100 years old. A Greenland shark alive today might have been born before the United States declared independence. In recent years, scientists using advanced underwater robots and camera systems have recorded more footage of deep-sea giants in their natural habitats. What they've seen reinforces how little we understand these creatures. Giant squid have been filmed hanging vertically in the water, arms dangling, possibly waiting for prey to pass below them. Colossal squid beaks have been found with tissue damage, suggesting the squid attack prey much larger than themselves, possibly including young whales. Perhaps most disturbing is the realization that these giants might be disappearing before we fully understand them. Deep-sea fishing operations, which drag massive nets across the sea floor, are destroying the habitats where many of these creatures live. Climate change is warming and acidifying the ocean, potentially affecting the deep-sea conditions that allow gigantism to occur. We may be losing species we've never even documented, creatures that took millions of years to evolve, simply because we're changing the ocean faster than they can adapt. In 2023, scientists conducting research in the Pacific Ocean's Clarion-Clipperton Zone made a discovery that challenged one of biology's most fundamental assumptions. Using sensors placed on the ocean floor at depths exceeding 13,000 feet, they detected something impossible: oxygen production in complete darkness. For as long as we've understood life on Earth, we've believed that oxygen could only be produced through photosynthesis, the process by which plants and algae use sunlight to convert carbon dioxide and water into oxygen and sugars. But here, in the absolute darkness of the deep sea floor, oxygen levels were increasing with no sunlight present. The explanation, when researchers worked it out, was both fascinating and disturbing. The seafloor in this region is covered with polymetallic nodules, potato-sized lumps of metal-rich rock that have formed over millions of years. These nodules contain high concentrations of manganese, cobalt, nickel, and other metals. The researchers theorized that differences in electrical potential between different parts of the nodules could be creating enough voltage to split water molecules through electrolysis, separating them into hydrogen and oxygen, just like a battery powering an electrolysis cell. In essence, the ocean floor was making its own oxygen using a geochemical battery. The discovery raised profound questions about the origins of life on Earth. If oxygen can be produced without photosynthesis, then early Earth, before plants evolved, might have had pockets of oxygen-rich water powered by similar processes. Life might have begun in these oxygenated zones, feeding on the oxygen and using it to power more complex metabolic processes. But the discovery is disturbing for another reason. The Clarion-Clipperton Zone is being eyed for deep-sea mining operations. Companies want to harvest those polymetallic nodules, which contain valuable metals used in batteries and electronics. If the nodules are removed, the oxygen production stops. The unique ecosystems that have evolved to depend on this oxygen, organisms that might exist nowhere else on Earth, would die. And we have no idea what those organisms are. The deep-sea research that detected the oxygen production wasn't equipped to conduct detailed biological surveys. Scientists know there's life down there, know that it's probably unique, but they don't know what species are present, how they're connected ecologically, or what would happen if their oxygen source was removed. We're contemplating strip mining the deep sea floor before we even know what's there. Other recent discoveries paint an equally disturbing picture. In 2024, researchers exploring the Southern Ocean around Antarctica documented over 30 new species, including a carnivorous sponge they nicknamed the death ball sponge. This organism doesn't filter feed like normal sponges. Instead, it uses hook-like structures to snag passing creatures, then slowly digests them over days or weeks. Deep-sea expeditions have found ecosystems living beneath the seafloor itself, in fractures and caves within the volcanic rock. These organisms survive on chemicals seeping up from below, living in complete darkness, under crushing pressure, isolated from the surface world. Some of them are unlike anything else known to science, with metabolic processes that don't fit into our standard categories of life. In the Mariana Trench, scientists have found amphipods with bodies full of PCBs and other industrial pollutants at concentrations higher than in some of the most polluted rivers on Earth. These chemicals, released into the environment decades ago and supposedly broken down or dispersed, have instead accumulated in the deepest parts of the ocean, concentrating as they move through the food chain. The creatures at the bottom of the deepest trench on Earth are poisoned with waste from human activities that occurred half a world away. Plastic has been found everywhere researchers have looked in the deep ocean. Microplastics in sediment cores from depths exceeding 20,000 feet. Plastic bags photographed at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Fishing gear draped over deep-sea coral formations. Every expedition that looks for plastic finds it, no matter how remote or deep the location. Perhaps most disturbing are the marine snow studies that show how our waste is being incorporated into the ocean's natural processes. Marine snow is the constant gentle rain of organic particles falling from the surface to the deep ocean, made up of dead plankton, fecal pellets from marine animals, and fragments of larger organisms. It's the primary food source for deep-sea life, the foundation of the entire deep ocean ecosystem. Recent studies have found that marine snow now includes microplastics in virtually every sample examined. The plastic particles aggregate with organic material, making them denser and causing them to sink. Deep-sea organisms can't distinguish between food particles and plastic particles, so they consume both. The plastic accumulates in their bodies, potentially interfering with digestion, reproduction, and other vital processes. We're poisoning the deep ocean's food supply, and we have no idea what the long-term consequences will be. Scientists studying deep-sea fish populations have documented mutations and deformities in species living near areas of heavy human activity, like shipping lanes and industrial fishing zones. The exact cause remains unclear. It could be pollution, noise stress, disruption of migration patterns, or some combination of factors, but the pattern is undeniable. The deep ocean is changing, and not for the better. Some of the most recent and disturbing discoveries come from simple observation. Submersibles equipped with cameras have documented deep-sea creatures displaying behaviors that suggest stress or confusion. Fish swimming in erratic patterns, octopuses abandoning their dens for no apparent reason, coral formations that should be vibrant, showing signs of disease or death. The deep ocean, once thought to be stable and unchanging, is reacting to something, and researchers aren't entirely sure what. Climate change is affecting even the deepest parts of the ocean. Water temperature changes at depth are small, sometimes just fractions of a degree. But for organisms adapted to absolute stability, even small changes can be catastrophic. Ocean acidification, caused by the absorption of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, is making it harder for deep-sea organisms to build shells and skeletons. Oxygen levels in some deep ocean regions are dropping as warming surface waters reduce the ocean's ability to dissolve oxygen. We're learning that the deep ocean isn't isolated from the surface world. What happens at the surface eventually affects the depths, sometimes in ways we don't expect or understand until it's too late. The ocean is interconnected, and we're altering every part of it simultaneously. The ocean has always been humanity's final frontier, more alien and unexplored than any other environment on Earth. We've sent 12 people to walk on the moon, but only 3 have descended to the deepest point in the ocean. We've mapped the surface of Mars in greater detail than we've mapped most of the sea floor. And every time we venture into those crushing depths, every time we turn our instruments toward that darkness, we find something that challenges our understanding or disturbs our assumptions. We've found life in